Welcome out, everyone, to session number 15. Today is October the 4th, 2022. And we know the world is a mess and everything's coming apart at the seams. But a local boy just hit home run number 62. So there are some good things going on in the world. We're here studying the Bible together. So all is good with us, I hope. Last session, number 14, we looked at Daniel 9:27 as a text, and we're going to start there again tonight. And we're going to last session, we talked more about who is the prince to come in Daniel 9:27. And I tried to show why I concluded that it's the Antichrist, and that 9:24 through 27 is an overview of two princes, a good prince and an evil prince, and two covenants. And tonight we're going to look at a little bit more of the timing. I hope it's really going to be enjoyable for us the next few sessions, because we're going to try to start filling in this timeline of the last 7 years. So I made sure tonight I didn't draw any arcs. I didn't draw any weird things and a lot of arrows and a lot of busy stuff, because it confuses even me. But real simple, just a 7-year timeline. It's the 70th week of Daniel. We know from this prophecy, this vision of 9:24 through 27, we know it's 70 periods of 7 years. And the simplest way to show that, because people wonder how it says 70 weeks, a week to us is 7 days. But that's one of those examples of the mistake of trying to force modern English into ancient language. And it was real common among the Hebrews that a week could just be a block of 7, whatever 7 you want it to be. For instance, when Jacob fell in love with Rachel, I knew it wasn't Leah, but it was Rachel. Leah had eye problems. But their father tricked him into marrying Leah. But the agreement was, when he said, I want to marry Rachel, the Bible says, you can go find it in Genesis. It uses this very term. Laban said, you work with me for 1 week in 7 years. So it's a real common idea in Hebrew language. But the easiest way to show this to someone who doubts, who thinks you're trying to make it up or force it into it, is the whole vision is about why were they in Babylon for 70 years? Because for 490 years, 77s, they had violated the Sabbath year. And so this is all spelled out in Chronicles and Daniel and so forth, that because they had violated 70 Sabbath years, which is one every 7 years, let the land rest. He said, I'm going to take you out of the land, and then the land will be forced to rest. So if you're able to get people to see that he's using 490 years, 77s of their history of violating 70 Sabbath years, and now he's going to talk about 77s or 490 years of their future. And if you can explain it that simply, people are like, yeah, a light bulb turns on. I can see where you get that it's 490 years. 77s. And he covers, through verse 26, he covers the first 69, so 483 years. And that gets us to the start of verse 26, Messiah shall be cut off. Isaiah 53 says he is cut off from the land of the living. It's his death. And that's at the end of 69. And then we're not told about the 70th until verse 27. And it says, he shall confirm a covenant or make strong a covenant, not necessarily a new covenant, but confirm one that they already. And what we're going to do on this timeline is tonight we're going to talk about what happens in the middle of the week. And I have 8 numbers across. That's the handout that you have. And I've given you enough details of each one and a few key verses. I'm trying to get better. Gary Sr.'s helping me. It's taken me 15 sessions and I still don't have it right. But he's been helping me all along that your outlines and what you're saying in your lesson that sometimes are confusing. I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to just really clarify what I'm trying to get across. But these 8 things that happen in the middle of the week, even though I have them across at first, straight up and down is really more what they're like. They happen almost at the same time or have their starting point almost exactly at the same time. And I show that in the handout, but at the end of each point, I have a little asterisk, and then I have in bold with the passage of a timestamp. And as you go down through them, you'll notice they all have a similar timestamp: 42 months, time times half a time, 1,260 days. Well, all of those are just a different way of saying 3.5 years. And I tried in my studies the last 2 weeks, there's so many events that in my mind, maybe there's like a 3-month or 6-month period, because they can't all start the same day. There's just too many big things. But when God puts the timestamp to each one of the events and says they are 3.5 years, each one of these, or most of them, are 3.5 years, then that tells me that the middle of the week is so dramatic, so huge of what happens, that it does trigger all of these events. Now, not all of them may be full bloom on day 1, but at least the plan for all of them is put into place, evidently on the same day. And as you'll see, as I go through these, I do make the first and second event possibly 30 days apart. Because the first 2 events, the breaking of the covenant, the stopping of the sacrifices, event number 1, event number 2, the abomination of desolation, they are always paired together. But their timestamp, according to Daniel 9:27, is the middle of the week. Now that is I would call it a less exact timestamp. In other words, it might mean exactly in the middle of the week, or it might mean in the midst of the 7 years. The reason I say that is I've tended to conclude that the breaking of the covenant, the stopping of the sacrifices, might happen 30 days before the abomination of desolation. But they're both in the middle of the week. That is one way I explain the 1290, that odd 1290 number at the end of the book of Daniel. Blessed is he who comes to the 1290. All the other timestamps are 1260 or 42 months or time times half a time, exactly 3.5 years. So my thinking is that the breaking of the covenant, the stopping of the sacrifices, might happen 30 days earlier. And then there's a big pushback by Israel. In fact, as we go through here, I'll even bring up the idea that they may be the ones who kill the Antichrist because he breaks the covenant. And that's a big deal. For 3.5 years, they've been able to renew their religion on the Temple Mount, free access to it. That is a huge deal. And for him to stop it is going to cause a very dramatic response. We do know in point 4, we do know that there is a death and resurrection event however you explain it, that happens to the Antichrist in the middle of the week. How does he die? Well, the descriptions through Daniel especially, he's involved in a lot of battles. Some of them with the West, by the way. The ships of Chittim in Daniel 11. That word Chittim, some of you have a footnote that says it means Cyprus, but it simply means the West. Any military force that's in the Mediterranean coming from the West to the Middle East is what that has meant in history. And many people believe, and I tend to agree with this, that at some point the West says you've gone too far. And they put a stop to him for a short time. He's able to overcome it eventually. But there's these series of battles he's involved in. He eventually captures Jerusalem. And he does that right about the time of point number 2, the abomination of desolation. So I'm thinking in that 30-day period, maybe between event 1 and 2, is when Israel responds by killing him, assassinating him. But somehow he has this resurrection event. He comes back to life. At the same time as point number 3, when Satan's cast out of heaven by Michael, and he's cast to the earth, and he's full of rage and wrath, Revelation 12 explains, because he knows he has a short time. That's when he incarnates in some way. He's able to focus his entire power in that man is sin. That may be his resurrection event. Just like Jesus rose from the grave by the power of God, the Antichrist in some way is going to rise from the dead through the power of his father, Satan. And that is partly their attempt to imitate Christ, because he's the counterfeit Christ, and he tries to copy Christ whenever he can as part of the great deception. So I said all that to say simply, point number 1, the breaking of the covenant, if it happens 30 years before point number 2, then that helps explain the mysterious 1290. Because these two events, the breaking of the covenant, the abomination of desolation, are always grouped together. We'll look at that real quick here. But not necessarily on exactly the same day. We have a little bit of wiggle room, especially with the first event. The abomination of desolation does seem to have an exact 1,260 days or 3.5 years tied to it. But if the first event happens 30 days earlier, then they both can have the same ending point. But the first event has a 30-day earlier starting point. That's one way to explain why 1260 in some places, why 1290 in other places. Another possible way of explaining the 1290 at the end of Daniel, this is simpler, so this may be the correct one, is that we're talking about Jewish calendar on a lot of this, aren't we? 30-day months. But a lunar year, based on the cycle of the moon, a lunar year is only 354 days. Because a lunar month is not 30 days, is it? It's 29.5 days. So in the Jewish calendar, in their 12 months, 1 month will be 30 days, the next month will be 29 days. And they go back and forth like that all through the year. Because they're trying to stay on that 29.5 days. But you can't really do that on a calendar, can you? So 30 and 29, 30 and 29. And so by doing that in the course of a year, you come up with 354 days. So But they have to keep up with the sun, and they have to keep up with the seasons, and they have to keep up with the way time really is, which is not 354 days a year. It's 365.24 something, not even exactly a quarter. 365.24 something. Depends on where you are in the equator, actually changes. I'm making this more complicated than it needs to be. But how do they stay up with solar time, with real time in a lunar calendar? Well, the way Israel, of course, through God's direction, the way Israel came up with it is about every 3 years, you add an extra month. Catches you back up to real time. I said all that to say this. In 3.5 lunar years, 1,260 days, you will have added an extra month. So in real time, it's 1,290 days or thereabout. So the 1,290 may be simply God's way of saying at the end of the book of Daniel, yes, it's 1,260, but in real solar time, it's 1,290. Because an extra month has been added in during those 3.5 years. It may be that simple. So, I love this 7 + 1 = 8 equation. That's found a lot in prophecy. And as I said, I tried my best. There's so many major events. I really worked hard these last 2 weeks trying to this order that I'm going to go in. I tried to figure out what would be the real order of events. In other words, it's not necessarily the way I have it, but would number 4 come right after number 2? Would number 6 come right after number, I was trying to work it out that way, maybe over a several month period. But you know what the Bible does that's so great? It backs you into a corner. It really does. And when I started naming each of these events and putting them down on paper and the verses that went along with them, that's when I began to realize each of them have the same timestamp, 3.5 years. So they can't have a very broad, different starting point. There's something about this breaking of the covenant, the abomination of desolation. And as we go through these, you'll actually see, I think on your handout, don't I? I may actually have the second possibility that 3 and 4 come between 1 and 2. In other words, here's the scenario. He breaks the covenant. Israel gets all fired up. They kill him. Satan's cast down from heaven right then, brings him back to life. And then he goes into the temple and declares himself God. So I'm thinking 3 and 4, the death and resurrection event may precede the abomination of desolation. By that I mean, what gives him the boldness and power to go into the Holy of Holies and declare himself God? I can't see anything more than a death and resurrection event provides that impetus or that ability for him to do something that bold. And so you work it out however you can. They all happen in really rapid succession. And with Satan being cast down to the earth and empowering Antichrist in kind of an incarnation counterfeit thing, he could put all of these plans into the Antichrist in one day. It may take a while to implement some of them, but they could actually have the same starting point and still be considered 3.5 years long each. So this First event that I have, of course, is this breaking of the covenant. And we've looked at these verses, but the two main ones I want to look at on this point is 11:31 of Daniel. And I'm trying to emphasize this idea, Daniel 11:31. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily, and I've pointed out that the word daily is the word. The word sacrifices is in italics. That it's the word for the daily, normal, regular, continual sacrifice that Israel had always done in the temple. And so they add the word sacrifices because that is what it is talking about. But in the Hebrew language, in the original scriptures that Daniel wrote down, is simply the word daily. They should so that helps us understand, because it helps answer the question that people have. You mean to tell me that you really think they're going to start their daily sacrifices in the temple again? That's just so bizarre. And it does seem bizarre to us. But if you're Jewish and you don't believe Jesus was the Messiah, therefore you believe that all of the law of Moses is still, every bit of it's still in place, then, and we'll work this out in another session, we're going to try to do the same thing. What happens at the beginning of the week? And then we're also going to do what happens at the end. So we're going to have this list of events and scriptures of the major events that happen at each one of those three places along that timeline. And I think it's going to be an interesting and enjoyable exercise that we're going to go through. And it'll just be a way for you to show others what happens and when it happens and what verse speaks to it along the way. But when we get to lining up what happens at the beginning of the 7 years, we're going to look at passages that to me describes some type of war going on, and Israel is winning major. And so part of the purpose of the covenant, of confirming the covenant, is to end that war, because the enemies of Israel are getting beaten like they have in the past. And so they'll come up with this, let's sit down and draw up a treaty of peace, or at least cessation of battles. And Israel will be in a position of having the upper hand. So they'll be able to dictate what the terms of the covenant are. And if you're Israel, what would you want in that covenant? The right to our own land and our own city and our own Temple Mount, and to renew the religion that has been stopped by Gentile powers for a long time. We want you to guarantee safety to practice our religion on our own Temple Mount. I mean, it's obvious that if you have the upper hand as Israel, those are the kind of things you're going to demand be put in there. And the enemies of Israel, that 10-nation confederation, and the man of sin that has just newly risen up to power, they're going to have an agreement with each other. Let's just go along with this for now. It'll buy us some time. We'll be able to regroup. We'll be able to get more people on our side. We'll be able to tell a bunch of lies about Israel, or whatever they're going to do, and build up this effort that sometime in the future we're going to be in a position to do what we could not do this time. And I think the scriptures kind of back up that scenario. And whenever he reaches a point 3.5 years into it that we have rebounded enough, we've regained enough power and weapons, we have enough agreements from whatever major powers in the world that are at least backing them with arms and money and so forth. I mean, we could just see, we can see this scenario based on the Russia-Ukraine battle. and all the major powers behind the scenes pulling the strings, and sending arms, and doing all kinds of crazy things like blowing up pipelines, and no one knows who did it, all kinds of crazy things. But the face of the battle is Israel and these 10 nations and the Antichrist. And so they reach a point where they're able to break that agreement. And Israel is so angry about it, overwhelmed by it, that they strike back. And I think that's where event number 3 and 4, the casting down of Satan and the death and resurrection event of Antichrist, so that then maybe event number 2 takes place. He goes into the temple, declares himself to be God. Because if Satan has complete control over you, remember his original sin? I will be like the Most High. Now that's the mindset of the Antichrist. I will be like the Most High. In fact, regarding Israel's God, I will be above their God. And I will show that I am above their God by letting them know that what they did to me and killing me, or whatever, if they did. And now I'm this superhuman being. I'm going to go into their temple and declare that I'm better than their God. And they're not going to be able to stop me. And they won't. For 3.5 years, they won't be able to stop him. And in his mind and many people's minds, he succeeded. And what he declared in their temple about their God and that he was greater will appear to have succeeded. So that's kind of how I see these first 4 events on the handout working itself out. But in verse 31, again, Daniel 11, they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Okay, keep your finger there and go to 12:11. And from that time, the daily sacrifice, again, the same thing. Daily is the correct word. Sacrifice is in italics. Is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days. So possibly 1290 from the sacrifice taken away, but still only 1260 from the abomination. But that's only a possibility. But what I'm really trying to point out, those 2 events are always grouped together. But the taking away the daily sacrifice, which 927 describes it as breaking the covenant. So breaking the covenant is the same as taking away the daily sacrifice. Taking away the daily sacrifice is not just about taking away the daily sacrifice. It's symbolic of something bigger. If he says you can no longer practice your religion on the Temple Mount, he's basically saying the covenant is broken. I'm not standing by any part of that covenant any longer. So the ending of the sacrifices is just kind of the visual, symbolic action that speaks of something larger. I no longer honor this contract, which means also I no longer honor that you have a right to your land. I no longer honor that you have a right to exist. I no longer honor that you have a right to your city, much less your Temple Mount. It speaks about all of that by stopping the sacrifices. So these 2 events are always grouped together, but the taking away the daily sacrifice is always named first. So that just kind of adds to my thinking that they may be 30 days apart. It's always first, and then the result leads to the abomination of desolation, maybe 30 days later. Maybe not. Maybe not. I could be wrong on all that. And then the event number 2 is the abomination of desolation. We read those verses. And I do want to look at 2 verses in Daniel 11. I think I have them written in your handout. Verse 28 and 30. The language is really important here. Daniel 11:28, while returning to his land with great riches, which is probably in Syria, somewhere just north of Israel. It's interesting that Syria and Iraq and southern Turkey, and that whole region for the last, 10, 20 years, it's almost like Satan's already dwelling there, which is fascinating to me because that area is also part of the area where the seven churches of Asia were. And in Revelation 2 and 3, he speaks a couple of times about those churches in that area. Pergamos is one of them, Thyatira. This is where Satan's seat is. And people have been mystified by that statement through the centuries. What does he mean? That's where Satan's seat is. Maybe he means as much in prospect. That is where Satan's headquarters is going to be on the earth when he is cast out of heaven, as described in Revelation 12. Because that's where Antichrist arises, I think, out of Syria, Iraq, southern Turkey area. And then he's coming down from the north to try to conquer Israel, and he ends up taking Jerusalem. But look at the wording. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, which is that covenant made in Daniel 9 in that vision. Against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage, return to his own land. Then verse 30, for ships from Cyprus or Shittim or Chittim, it just means the west, from Mediterranean direction, shall come against him. This is another big illusion that people have. Antichrist influence and power may affect the whole world, but he has a 10-nation base. And he has quite a bit of opposition that rises against him over the course of these 7 years. Not everybody's happy with him. Not everybody likes to be under his thumb. The West, China, Japan, Australia, some of these world powers, Europe, they may say, let's go along with him for a while because he's brought about peace. This could have been a world war. It could have wiped us all out. And so he's really something to behold. So let's kind of go along with it. But he takes it too far. And it appears that some of these who are going along with him, who have the ability to stand against him, but haven't yet, decide, we've got to show him that we're not going to just simply agree with everything that he does. And so here we have this mysterious ships from the west shall come against him. That's not Israel. It's some other major power in the world that's decided maybe he's gone too far. Therefore, he shall be grieved, because he thought they were going along with him. And they're going to say, you've gone too far. We're putting a stop to this. So as a result, he's going to return in rage against the holy covenant. So we're told twice that at some point he decides, I am going to do everything I can against this holy covenant that I started 3.5 years ago. So those are two important verses that speaks to his mindset during the middle of the week of I'm deciding it's time to end that thing. And this there's a verse in Ezekiel 35. We may have looked at this before, but I want to just kind of use it as an overall idea of what's going on here, I think. Ezekiel 35:5. Because you have had an ancient hatred and have shed the blood of the children of Israel by the power of the sword at the time of their calamity, and this is their final calamity, the time of Jacob's trouble. They have had a number of calamities, but there's going to be an ultimate time of their calamity. And this ancient hatred. So there's something about agreeing to let them renew their holy covenant and renew the full practice of their religion on the Temple Mount, however that manifests itself. It may not be a full-blown temple like we think of Solomon's temple. It may, when they came back from Babylon with Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest, before they ever built the temple, the first thing they built was the altar, and they started sacrifices on the Temple Mount. And that, to them, that was the same as having a temple. So we see examples in the Bible that doesn't necessarily have to be a finished building and this huge thing on top of the Temple Mount. How does it butt up against the Muslim mosque up there, Dome of the Rock? People try to work out all those. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same size as Solomon's temple, therefore it doesn't fit along with that Muslim mosque. I think our thinking is a little bit too not necessary in order for them to practice their religion on the Temple Mount. But there's something about them starting that again that taps into this ancient hatred, is what I'm trying to say. And the Antichrist in those 10, at least majority or mixed Muslim nations, along with maybe some European or other Middle East nations, they hate that holy covenant. They've hated it since the day God said it goes to Isaac and not Ishmael. The day that God said it goes to Jacob and not Esau. They have hated that holy covenant that God made with Abraham's seed. And something about, I think they felt forced in this covenant. That's why I say Israel's probably winning a war, and they agreed to terms that they don't like. And so they've hated it all along. It's not like he just suddenly hates the Holy Covenant. He's hated it all along, but for political and military purposes, he's had to go along with it. But he's probably every day that he agreed to it, he's been looking for ways to break it. So in the middle of the week, he's had enough. His rage against the Holy Covenant. These Western nations have stopped him at this particular effort. He's licking his wounds. He blames Israel for the whole thing. He says, I don't care what happens from here on out. That's when Satan empowers him. He breaks the covenant. Israel, whoever, he dies. But he Revelation 13 describes it as a head wound, a death wound, which is amazing language to me. Remember the original prophecy, Genesis 3:15. You're going to bruise her seed's heel, but one from her seed's going to crush your head. I know I'm not even hardly going by script, but I hope I'm getting my point across. There's something really deep going on here with this death and resurrection event. There's a reason why the Bible calls it a head wound. It ties into Genesis 3:15. And when Satan comes down and somehow raises him from the dead, or at least it appears he's raised from the dead, maybe that's what I'll get to next. It will be Satan's way and Antichrist's way of saying that promise in Genesis 3:15, I overcame it. He gave me a head wound that killed me, and it didn't last. I am greater than God's promise. That's why he could go into the temple and declare himself to be greater than God, because he overcame that original prophecy, I'm going to crush your head. Well, you did crush my head, and here I am alive again. So what does your promise mean, God? It means I'm greater than you. I overcame that prophecy. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a really deep, ancient, foundational prophecy that that Antichrist is going to be able to present to the Christian world as well. You guys have been hanging your hat on that prophecy, and I just defeated it. That is why I think Revelation 13. We'll go turn there right now. That's why Revelation 13. By the way, I think I'll do what I did last time, since I'm kind of rambling all over the place instead of going in exact order. I'll send you my extended notes too, that'll fill in some of these gaps that are not included in your handout. So it says in Revelation 13:3, I saw one of his heads, because there's 10. It's a 10-headed, 10-toed, 10-headed beast, but he overcomes 3 of them. So 7 come in willingly, 3 he has to kind of force into it. And so one of his heads, as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. So no wonder all the world marveled and followed the beast. He has his own, and it's not like in Jesus' day where nobody saw it. This is modern day technology where everyone's going to see it on their TVs. He was declared dead on the national news. Now he's alive again. And he's telling the whole Christian world, you only thought the Bible was true, but it's a fake book full of fake promises. All of you have taught for centuries that this seed of the woman is going to come and crush the head of the seed of the serpent, and your Messiah, your Jesus, your Savior that you claim died on the cross for our sins, that he's going to come back and crush my head, and I'm going to be forever defeated. Look at me, I'm alive. And that may be when the great falling away happens. If you're able to say that and it looks real, and everybody's hung their hat on Genesis 3:15, and it's obvious he's overcome it, and your faith hasn't been all that strong all along anyway, and you're going to say, I've based my life on a book and a God that did not tell me the truth. Here's the evidence. And all of that feeds into why I speak so often of the great deception. What greater deception will there be than a death and resurrection event that the whole world will see? And him able to declare, your God could not keep his promise, which means he's not really a very powerful God. And that book you've been following is full of lies. So the third event that I actually put maybe between 1 and 2, Michael stands up, that's Daniel 12:1, and Satan is cast down. It's just a good way of, because Revelation 12:7 through 12, since we're in Revelation 13, let's go back to chapter 12. I put verse 7, war broke out in heaven. I think that's the same thing as Daniel 12:1. Michael shall stand up. Why does he stand up? He's going to battle against Satan. So that's how I bring that over to Revelation. War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought. They did not prevail, nor was a place found there for them in heaven any longer. The great dragon was cast out. And I don't really understand all this. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 describes the original casting out of Satan. But he's still called the accuser of the brethren. In the book of Job, he's able to come before the throne of God and making an accusation against Job. I don't understand how he still has access, but he does. And there's something really powerful and profound about it, because there's something about him being cast out completely. No more access to accuse the brethren. And that's why it says in verse 10, the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. Evidently, this is permanent. So I don't know how all that's been worked out in God's mind. But that's a really big deal. It's so big that when he's cast out of heaven permanently, in heaven, they rejoice in verse 10, and they say, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ has come. But that's in heaven. On earth, in verse 12, rejoice, O heavens, of course, he's cast out. And you who dwell in them, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Evidently, he's confined to the earth, and just like Satan entered Judas, Satan will enter the Antichrist. And the Antichrist will be Satan in human form, basically. Just like Jesus was God in human form. So all this counterfeit stuff is going on. Woe to you, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So in your handout, I put this short time probably is 1,260 days. I've got to really move quickly here. Point number 4, the death and resurrection event I already read verse 3 of Revelation 13, and also in verse 12 of Revelation 13. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Death wound. Now, the question could be asked, I think I asked it on the handout, is it real? Is this a real death and resurrection event? Back in 13:3, it says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. So then you say, well, in modern technology, they can make it look like it happened and everyone will be convinced, so it doesn't have to be real, and then they can make him come back to life. And as far as everyone's concerned, it was real, even if it wasn't real. And we're pretty much at that place now where that could happen. And through everyone looking at it on the TV and on the internet, it's kind of like we've said, these really, really good magicians. I don't know how he made that bowling ball disappear that he was holding in his hand. I was looking real close, but it disappeared, and it ended up in the seat next to me, and I didn't see anybody bring it over and put it there. I don't know, but the ability to make this death and resurrection event look real. But if we look in chapter 11, verse, let me see. 13:14. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword. So it's more than just illusion by technology. It appears he is killed in battle, or at least severely wounded, to where they're able to say he died, he came back to life as part of their deception. But he was wounded by the sword and lived. So this is another way he'll be able to shake the faith of nominal Christians. Is he'll say, yeah, your Bible says in Revelation 19 that your Messiah comes out of heaven with the sword, and the sword goes out of his mouth, and he kills me. But here I was, killed by a sword, and I'm alive. So you can't trust your Bible. And I'm thinking he'll be able to do a number of those things, which might be the cause of the great apostasy or the falling away by those who are deceived by it. In chapter, let me see, 17 and 11. 17 and 11. And the beast that was and is not is himself also the eighth. The reason this is important is he's both the seventh and the eighth. He was the seventh, but then he was not. That's his death wound. Now, was he really dead? And now he resurrects as the eighth. Or does he just make it appear to? I guess it really doesn't matter in the big picture, but somehow it's going to be convincing enough to where it will be seen as a death and resurrection event. This is when he is revealed. 2 Thessalonians 2 and 3 is when it says in 2 Thessalonians 2 and 3, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, the apostasy, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. He's not really revealed as this until his death and resurrection event. And Satan enters him and empowers him, and he breaks the covenant. So all four of the first four events that I have listed is what reveals him as, or the way I like to say it is, an Antichrist becomes the Antichrist. This is when he's full blossomed into being the Antichrist. And that timestamp I put on there is 42 months. Event number 5, there's a flight into the wilderness. That's Revelation 12 and 6. I'll read that real quick. I apologize to those who will watch this video because, well, I think what I'll do to everyone, my entire mailing list, I'll just send out my extended notes along with the handout I gave you because I provide a lot more information that I'm not really, verses and points that I'm not really bringing out tonight. This flight into the wilderness, 12 and 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God. You know, I never made this connection before. Remember when Jesus said in John 14, I am going away to prepare a place for you, and I will come again. But he's also preparing a place for Israel to flee to for safety when the Antichrist turns on them after he breaks the covenant. And they should feed her there 1,260 days. I give 12:14, the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, the place prepared for her, for a time, times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. So he's on the verge of wiping out Israel. And so God says he's not going to wipe them all out. I'm going to make sure some of them make it all the way through so that they can repent as a nation at my return. Event number 6, Jerusalem is taken once again by the Gentiles while Israel is in the wilderness. Revelation 11, verse 1 and 2 speaks about measuring the temple. Has been given over to the Gentiles for 42 months. So in order for him to enter the temple, declare himself God, set up that image, and then it comes to life and speaks, which is part of his whole death and resurrection experience. He has to control at least most of Jerusalem. And all of our lifetimes, we're familiar with portions of Jerusalem being under Israeli control, part of it being under Arab control. So it's no new thing for us. So it's going to be kind of the same thing, where he's going to control at least a portion of Jerusalem. I do want to read over in Daniel 11, just a verse or two, and then Not really going to be able to talk about the ministry of the two witnesses, but you know, the good thing about it is we have more lessons in the future. And a lot of these things we're going to look at in more detail. I just mainly wanted to go over the list briefly, name them, some of the key verses. But in Daniel 11 and 31, where you read this, forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. How will they have the freedom to do that? They, you notice the word they in verse 31. They shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They will place the abomination. His armies, they're going to be in Jerusalem with him. And then in verse 45, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. So he's right there outside of Israel, where his headquarters is. And he's able to kind of come and go into Jerusalem because Israel has had to flee out into the wilderness. The ministry of the two witnesses begins, and you have the verses that I put there. A lot of people try to make the ministry of the two witnesses the first half of the 7 years, but I cannot. Again, you're forced into a corner because this timestamp in 11:3 for their ministry is 1,260 days. And all of these timestamps that I have in bold, they're all speaking about the last half of the 7 years of events that take place from the middle onward. And the proof of that is point 2 under number 7. The timing is connected to the second woe of Revelation 11:14. And the reason that's important is the second woe of 11:14 is the third woe is right on its heels, and the third woe is verse 15, the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So the ministry of the two witnesses ends with the second and then the third woe, which is the sixth and the seventh trumpet, which is the trumpet of the Lord's return. So it's the last half of the 7 years. And then my last bonus, number 8, is special revelation and special grace is given to the saints. And the church becomes a martyr church once again. And I give all the verses here. You can look at it when I send it out, or some of them are on your handout. In Daniel 7, Daniel 11, Revelation 12 and 13. Many verses speaks about that he is in the process of overcoming the saints, killing them. And chapter 12, verse 17, when Israel is preserved in the wilderness, what is left of them, he turns his attention to the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of Jesus and follow him. And those would not be national Israel of any type, it's the saints. And as I like to say, just at that moment, when it appears all is lost, it appears he's won the victory, it appears the promises of God cannot be depended upon, just when things seem to be in total despair, the seventh trumpet sounds, and everything is reversed immediately. I want to close with one verse before I open it up to you. In Revelation, because I want to keep reminding you of this central point, Revelation 17 and 17. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose. His purpose. All these big, terrible events and, percentages of the world population dying and the saints on the run, being slaughtered, and Israel having to hide out or she's going to be slaughtered, and all these wars going on and pestilence and disease, just terrible stuff going on. But God wants to remind us, as bad as it is, it's fulfilling his purpose. Now, it doesn't get them off the hook for the evil that they're doing, just like at the death of Christ. They committed murder, but it was still fulfilling God's purpose. This guy's doing a lot of terrible stuff, but it's still fulfilling God's purpose. To be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast. Here's one of these famous untils. Until the words of God are fulfilled. All of this is fulfilling God's word, so that when Jesus comes back on that white horse and that sword goes out of his mouth, they capture the beast and the false prophet, cast him into the lake of fire, chain up Satan for 1,000 years. And that's when Jesus will be able to say, yeah, he was able to convince most of the world for 3.5 years that Genesis 3:15 was not true because he recovered from his death wound. And that my promise to my people was not true because he was on the verge of wiping you out. And he had so deceived the world to think that the Bible was no longer reliable and God could not keep his promises. I'm living proof that all of it was true and all of it is coming to pass because it was all according to God.